Amanda from Pontes Books here with the Chapter 16 vocabulary focus for the Prince and the Pauper. So this is one that's pretty important to the Prince and the Pauper and comes up an awful lot and is used in this way, kind of a more specific way for the Prince and the Pauper and other books that have to do with kind of royal families and kings and queens and things like that. Otherwise, this word normally is used slightly differently and can be used this way in the Prince and the Pauper as well, but most often it's going to have a specific definition. So our word for today is noble. So you can see here, this is just an image of a bunch of people who are noble looking. I guess you can't necessarily tell by looking at a person. I think that's kind of at the root of the Prince and the Pauper, is that don't judge someone by their appearance. But from the appearance of this picture, these are all noble looking people, because when we're looking at the word noble, specifically in the Prince and the Pauper, we're mostly talking about someone who is referring or belonging to a high social class. So that can be an adjective describing somebody. It can also be a noun describing the person who is a member of that social class. So it's really a noun and an adjective. I should have put them both in that definition. But like I said, we do use this word quite a lot outside of kind of the idea of social classes. So it can also be used to describe someone with high moral principles. So the words are related. You know, you really think about somebody who is in a higher social class, has a certain way they're expected to behave and to act. We talked about this a couple chapters ago with the word dignity. It was like a certain attitude that you were expected to have. That's kind of the same idea with noble here. So it's a certain set of kind of manners or principles that you exhibit. You can be described as being noble as well. But we wouldn't really use it in the noun form. If we're calling someone a noble, we're talking about somebody who's a part of that higher social class. But usually not like royal. So it'd be like all the royals, so the kings and the queens and the princes, and then nobles would be kind of like your dukes and your earls and your people with titles who weren't necessarily a part of the royal class or the royal family. So some examples: aristocratic, titled, and honorable. Those are all kind of synonyms to describe kind of both definitions of the word noble. And then some non-examples: humble. And this doesn't mean humble in the sense where you are not wanting to brag about what you're good at. This would more be like someone coming from humble beginnings. So not wealthy, kind of like a lower class is the way that I'm thinking about humble here. Dishonorable or plebeian or plebeian, that's another word that describes something that's kind of not part of that upper class area. So then when we look at the etymology of this word noble, we can trace it back to Old French. I'm sure it has a fancier Frencher sounding pronunciation than noble, but it is spelled the same, noble or something like that. And it means of noble bearing or birth. So there we again get kind of this birth status where it's kind of more who you are, not necessarily the way you act. And then we also see, we can trace it back to Latin, nobilis, meaning well-known, famous, renowned, excellent, superior, splendid, highborn, of superior birth. So that kind of encompasses, like I said, both the status and the way you act in this original meaning, which is why we use it for both. Some example sentences. So our straightforward sentence: the soldier will always be remembered for being a brave and noble man. So soldiers are often associated with kind of just this, manner of behaving that can be described as noble. They're fighting for a noble cause. We'll hear that a lot too, the phrase noble cause. And our sentence from the chapter, this one I had to kind of cut it apart a bit because it was kind of long and not all the parts were necessarily important. So at last came two nobles, richly clothed, who approach and rub the table with bread and salt. Now, out of context, that seems pretty strange. Actually, in context, it still seems pretty strange. It's a part of a tradition of getting ready for this royal banquet. So there's two nobles who are, dressed fancily. So some upper class I would assume gentlemen, and they come and they're preparing this table. And so part of that tradition is to apparently rub the table with bread and salt. Seems strange now, but we have a lot of traditions right now. Probably that would seem strange to other people in the future as well. Some other forms, like I said, noble itself can be a noun to describe that person, or noble is a plural form. We also have nobility. So that's kind of a collective term for a group of nobles, can be referred to as the nobility. And then just for fun, if you haven't already heard of, there is a thing called the noble gases. And I like science, so this brings me back, but I'm not gonna lie, it has changed a little bit since I studied the periodic table. So science people, forgive me if I get some stuff wrong, because science is always changing, which is cool. So the noble gases, you can see on the periodic table of elements, they take the place of the far right column. And they are comprised, it depends on kind of who you ask or what you're considering. There are either 6 or 7. So helium, neon, argon, krypton, xenon, radon are kind of the standard ones. And then I did actually see one list where there were also only 5. So one of those, I'm not sure, maybe it was contested or added a little bit later as well. Then there's this other one called oganesson. And so this one, like I said, depending on who you ask, it's considered or not, because it is actually synthetic, meaning it's man-made. So even though it does fit with kind of the sequence and fit in the table, it isn't quite the same. So some people consider it to be one, some consider it not to. So one of the reasons they're called noble gases is because they don't really react with anything. So this ability to have other things kind of provoke them and to not give any reaction is kind of seen as a noble response. That's like the ideal, proper way to respond if somebody's like poking at you, is just to not react. So it actually comes from a German word, Edelgas, again, not sure pronunciation. And then that has translated to noble gas in English, but that meaning, that idea that it's something that doesn't react, comes from that idea of being noble. They're noble gases. They're too good to react with other things. So that's noble. Hopefully you learned something. Have a good rest of your day.